rest of the king's garrison has either surrendered or been killed.
Assassination and revolution. Companions of change. Braganza noblemen had ruled Portugal for centuries. Now, with King Carlos dead, a republic replaced the monarchy. But more than the government had changed. Portugal, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, was subjected to religious persecution. These victorious revolutionaries saw the church as their enemy. It had supported the state and must pay a price. One action among many was to exile the church's highest authority, the Cardinal Patriarch. They sought social change, political objectives, but there was much more at stake. What they could not see was their role in an emerging grand design, a mosaic that reveals itself only when we look at a series of seemingly unrelated events. Events that many believe hold profound significance for the world today. Pieces of the puzzle include a world at war, Rasputin, his unnatural power, his violent death, execution of Nicholas II, Tsar of Russia, the slaying of the Empress and their children, the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin's rise to power, and the strange and beautiful experience of 3 children. Young shepherds tending their flock amid these Serra da Aire mountains of Portugal in the year 1917. More than 70,000 experienced the climax to the children's story. Among this crowd are 5 people who will tell us what they saw. 5 witnesses to the miracle of the sun. What really happened at the Cova da Iria in 1917? We'll examine the events and their implications for us, for our time. Is there a thread that can be followed that ties past to present and present to our future? That explains why millions throughout the world remember 3 shepherd children. Why millions are committed to act, to respond to the message of Fatima.
It doesn't seem to me this can be dismissed as an illusion, much less as a hoax or a fraud. Something happened there.
And then they said that Our Lady asked them to continue to go to the Covaderia every 13th of every month.
I look upon the miraculous happenings with skepticism. On the other hand, I know that the miraculous happenings do happen.
Went together with 4 young men because we were thinking
what could we do?
That could be something bad.
Bad people.
It could be something bad, they said.
There were many in the church who were skeptical, so the church wasn't pushing for this. The church wasn't encouraging people to believe it. They came because they did believe what they had heard, and this kind of event of this magnitude is just not that common, especially in our time, where there is so much unbelief.
Belief, disbelief. 3 children had predicted a public miracle, identified the date, time, and place. An extraordinary event had occurred. Newspaper accounts appeared worldwide. They referred to the miracle of the sun. Many expressed great doubt. There was skepticism concerning the dancing sun, the prophecies, the secret, the message of Fatima. In the past, revelation was widely accepted as a source of knowledge. Why not today, in the age of science, an age influenced by technology and humanism? Dr. Paul KURTZ offers an answer.
I think what's very important in the present loss of spirituality is the development of the Renaissance first, with the secularization of morals, and second, the development of modern science. With modern science, the great emphasis is upon reason and evidence and on the sense that man can control his own destiny. And so the modern world has this whole theme that man is the center of concern and not God.
You know, all these inventions that we are so proud of have taken place in my lifetime. I remember the world when there was no electricity, no telephone, no macadamized roads, no motor cars, none of these things.
In these images of progress, we see man as inventor, builder, dreamer. By the year 1914, many have come to believe all problems can be solved. Only good can follow the applications of scientific knowledge. Solutions packaged in a box labeled progress. Out of that box comes the specter of World War I. It's the summer of 1916, the summer of Verdun, the Battle of the Somme. There is intense suffering on both sides. 2.25 million casualties on the Western Front. It would seem no place on earth could be further removed from the destruction, the horror of war, than the Serra d'Aire mountains of Portugal, where farmers and shepherds regard the conflict as little more than a distant rumor. Fatima, 1917. For 3 young children tending their sheep, it is the best of times. Warner Brothers portrayed them, Hollywood fashion, in a feature film released in 1952. Here, in fact, are the very children. Lucia dos Santos, age 10, her cousin, Jacinta Marto, 7, and Jacinta's brother, 9-year-old Francisco.
They would go through the trap door when the family was gone and hide above us. They were there and we didn't know it. The 3 would hide for hours, always playing, running, jumping, hiding under the stairs. Yes, they were like all children, hiding, joking, always playing together.
That winter, huge armies battle each other and the elements. Trench warfare continues. The slaughter continues. 3 shepherd children who could neither read nor write, living in a small village 90 miles from Lisbon, might have limited knowledge of the Great War. But to better understand what happened to them in 1917, we need to examine historical events of which they could have little knowledge, if any. Events unfolding thousands of miles away in Russia. It's the world's largest single state, ruled for centuries by an arrogant autocracy, ruled by the Tsar in the name of God. For these last of the European serfs to be freed, life was harsh, filled with injustices. Ownership of the land was a crucial issue. In the cities, those whose backs were bent under the yoke of the Industrial Revolution faced new dangers, new fears, old tyrannies. By the turn of the century, there were widespread disturbances fed by bitterness, hopelessness. Father Giorgi Gappon organized a society of workers. They sought to present a peaceful petition for relief, and on a Sunday in January 1905, marched on the Winter Palace at St. Petersburg, marched singing, "God Save the Tsar." The emperor's troops fired into the crowd. Hundreds were mowed down. It was Bloody Sunday. Portraits of the Tsar and the crosses they carried fell with them. Autumn 1905. Following a general strike in the city, a frightened Nicholas II agrees to the formation of a legislative council. It would have limited powers and be called the Duma. The people would see little change in their lives.
In the later years of his reign, particularly just before World War I, the advisors became increasingly under the control of Rasputin, the so-called monk who was the most evil influence on Nicholas, and his wife became a bad influence because she was more concerned than anything else with the survival of her son, who had hemophilia, and she believed that only Rasputin could heal him, could make him well when he had one of the bleeding episodes, and therefore the whole government came increasingly under Rasputin's control, whom everyone knew outside the Tsar's family to be an evil man. There is no evidence that Rasputin had any sincere religious belief at all. There is some evidence that he was involved, at least in his early years, in various satanic cults and rites. There is very substantial evidence that toward the end of his life he possessed supernatural powers of satanic origin. It is the clearest case that I know of in history where a man who played a major historic role at a critical moment in history, where there is substantial, solid evidence that he was exercising powers which could only have come from hell.
1914, Russia is drawn into World War I. Poorly trained, poorly armed. Their first year in battle, 2 million Russians are killed, wounded, or captured.
Every great war from the 19th century on had led to a crisis in this essentially static, agrarian, militarized empire. And World War I being the most destructive, the most psychologically destructive as well as physically disruptive war of modern times, really, in many ways. It hit the Russian Empire just like a thunderclap, and it wasn't able ever really to recover.
Rasputin's influence over government appointments and decisions proves disastrous. So long as he lives, his power over the Empress, and therefore the nation, will be complete. Russian statesmen, and even some members of the royal family, convinced the fate of their country is at stake, seek his death. Rasputin is lured to Prince Yusupov's home and is poisoned, shot, beaten, finally drowned. March 1917. Holy Mother Russia, disillusioned by military defeats, unable to meet the very basic needs of her people, sees starvation, food riots, rebellion. The Tsar's government is not overthrown, it collapses. Within 16 months, a Rasputin prophecy will be fulfilled with the death of the royal family. The Bolsheviks will execute Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children. A provisional democratic government prepares for an election. Under the new freedoms, revolutionaries, enemies of the imperial regime, return to Russia.
A great many revolutionaries came back from abroad. Stalin and Molotov were in Siberia. Lenin was in Zurich, in Switzerland. The Bolsheviks were one of the smallest of the parties within the broad coalition of revolutionary parties, but they took advantage of the freedoms. Lenin came back in April 1917 on the so-called sealed train. As Churchill once put it, sealed like a plague bacillus.
Lenin is of fundamental importance in understanding the Russian Revolution. It could not have happened without him. All of the other situations that existed that made a revolution possible, that sort of opened the way to it, none of them would have resulted in a revolution, in my opinion, if it hadn't been for Lenin's presence. Lenin's presence was critical, determined to destroy the whole existing system in Russia as he was. He achieved his objective and brought a horror upon his native land, which is still there. The Russian Revolution of 1917 is the most important secular event in the history of this century, just as the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima, which came at the same time, could well be described as the most important religious event, and the two are obviously very closely related.
By 1917, Portugal's been drawn into the war. But in the many small Portuguese villages, issues involved in the conflict and the rise of Marxism in Russia are little known or debated. Certainly not understood by the children. Better known is the revolution that touched their own lives since the assassination of King Carlos.
In 1910, with the change of